I'm just soldering in the last of the electrolytic capacitors. I very nearly forgot to turn my camera on. That would have wrecked the as it happened experience. So these are poked through the board, and I know I haven't trimmed these legs before soldering. That's okay, I've got my own technique, which essentially means that if I snip it anywhere through any significant amount of solder, I just remelt it. It doesn't happen all that much, so, and it has made me a bit more conservative about the amount of solder I use. Oh, you get a view of my head, I suspect. The electrolytic capacitors are quite tall little fellows. They're the last to go in. They're a wonder of physics and possibly chemistry, possibly physical chemistry. I mean, a capacitor is a thing for storing electricity, and a lot of people will remember a Van de Graaff generator at school, which would store charge on the surface of a ball. Well, you can store charge on the surface of anything. So a regular film capacitor is a piece of metallized film that's just rolled up into a coil, and the one leg of the capacitor's on one end and one leg's on the other end, and they're non-polarized. Yeah, great view on my head. They're non-polarized. I should have my glasses on too, but partly for being able to see and partly for eye protection. There we go. Can't poke myself in the eye with a soldering iron now. Poke myself in my nice glasses with one. Yeah, nice view on my head again. A tip, flat, sticking on. And that's the simplest case for a capacitor. They're quite bulky for their capacitance, but they behave quite beautifully so far as capacitors go. Metallized polyester. If there is some sort of esoteric ultra low noise spec in play, metallized polystyrene, just don't price them. And then there are the ceramic ones that we're also comfortable with, and they have an advantage over the film capacitors in that they're not a coil in the same way, so they don't have a whole lot of inductance. So there are signals a ceramic capacitor will be able to deal with that an more inductive one will just reject. So I'm just got one leg on, and I'm just going to wander around the board. I don't even know which ones I haven't soldered yet, but this is the last of them, so I'm feeling patient, very patient. You don't want to lean on them too hard. If one leg's in and you lean on them, you can crank it over and pull the leg out of the capacitor. Electrolytic capacitors like these contain an electrolyte. It's not Gatorade, although in the 90s maybe it was. It's hard to say. And read about the capacitor plague on Wikipedia. It is an unbelievable story. Yeah, they're pretty good. Sometimes I've bent one of the legs a little bit crooked and then used it, like this one here next to 68,000 is this way. Just worked out that way. Yeah, these fellows are polarized. You put them in the wrong way and they're pretty much a short circuit, which is a serious problem. They just have to be right. And annoyingly, the board's marked with a plus, and the capacitor is marked with a stripe down its side covered in minuses. Or if it's a capacitor that's like a barrel with the leads coming out the end, there are arrows that point off towards minus. And so you've got to look for the marking and then not match it to the marking on the board. And the opportunity for error is substantial. surface mount ones are probably easier. I'm starting to become very sympathetic to people who are done with through hole, but and they're called electrolytic capacitors because they contain electrolyte in amongst the roll of stuffo, and by some gee whizzery, the net result of all of that is that their capacitance for their size is quite incredible. But they see that I'm off camera. I'll come back on camera. I'll give you a bit of a zoom because this is a horror show. In that the thermal relief is just not very good. So we're going to come in on this fellow. And the focus is awful. Let's see if I can do something about the focus. We'll get that right. Turn off the autofocus. That's worse. Yeah, turn the autofocus back on. Sorry, folks. The little pad, it's connected back to the ground plane, this great big sheet of copper here that's green. So all that green there is just copper with solder relief on it, and it's all negative. It's the same as these, and it's the same as the negative connection on the power supply. It's all negative. And they've relieved, and no doubt this is the Commodore board. I'm making no criticism of anybody, including Commodore. They didn't solder it by hand. They used wave soldering most likely. But it's connected in 4 different places. So the capacity of this little gold donut here to take heat and spread it into this copper is very significant. So we'll just warm up the donut without touching the lead. We'll add a bit of solder. This is one that's going particularly badly, which is great because I'm demonstrating. Hey, demonstrating my suffering. Come on, melt. It's not hot enough anywhere to get the solder to melt, and therefore it's not hot enough to get any. Well, there we go. It was still reluctant to cover the pad, but it drained through the via, and there was enough flux around so that I'm satisfied that it wet properly. Yeah, that one's not much better. You shouldn't do one component twice. One of the things about hand soldering that gives you a fighting chance of not damaging things is things have got 2 legs, you can do one at a time. But yeah, these things in the ground plane, I mean, I've got the iron set to 400 Celsius, which for leaded solder is a bit silly in some ways. The tip's about as big as you could hope for. You can put a bit of solder on the iron because the solder is actually a good heat conductor, and you can help transfer heat into the pad with a little bit of hot solder. But it's just not. There we go. And just hold it for a bit on a good joint. I really am done with any sort of project involving large scale through hole components. I've got to say, it's a skill I've got now, which is going to be awesome for. Now you just talk, wait for it to heat up. It's going to be awesome for doing rework, and I've got some audio electronics I need to do. And That's not cool. Solder everywhere. And my through-hole soldering skills have gone from acceptable to properly competent through this work. But I would have liked to have seen someone doing this before I started, because I was initially, if reluctant's the right word, hesitant to apply this much heat for this long. But if it's not going to melt the solder onto the joint, well, what can you do? It's just going to have to be whatever it'll take, as long as it takes. I'll never recover from watching Peppa Pig. Ben and Holly's one was better, but the kids were older by then. I used to let them watch it by themselves. It was Peppa Pig I had to sit through. Oh dear, that's just rough. I'm trying not to get my head in the way, which means I can't see it properly. I'll turn off the camera. A bit of smoke there. Feel like I'm at the end, so I don't need to ventilate properly. This is trap. Turn the camera off. The only thing that's left to do, apart from clean up the flux from this work by hand with a cotton bud, because I'm not going to put it back in the sink and start blowing it out with compressed air and so on again. Just using some wet cotton bud, dry cotton bud, and just doing it as I go. Part of the reason I'm leaving the leads on, so I can find them. I've still got to put a socket in here for AGNUS when it arrives, and then I need to check everything. I need to check for solder bridges, I need to check for little offcuts being caught underneath sockets as best I can. I need to check all of the component positions that don't have components in them to make sure that matches, because the BOM and the assembly guide, because, and the component finder, because that's a part of the thing with this board. Not everything's populated. And then I need to, once I've done all of that, I will start following John Hertel's guide on inserting ICs and gradually bringing various parts of this up until the whole lot runs.